Hello everyone, I'm Eva Amory and this is Humans Academy episode 2. I'm super excited for today's episode and we are going to explore conflict as an art and not necessarily something to be solved. And one thing I can guarantee you by the end of this episode is that you're going to learn how to approach conflict in a new, more refreshed, more realistic and useful way through storytelling. So let's go for it. Storytelling is the only field in the world that has made an art out of conflict. And this is my realization after reading tons and tons of books and beautifully encapsulated in the quote by screenwriter and author Robert McKee. He says that if there is no conflict, there is no story. At the same time, expert in relationships and psychotherapist Esther Perel says that every relationship is a story. I would dare to go and say that every human is in fact a collection of stories, but they need to be analyzed in their own context and within a system. This is something we see clearly when we study psychology, but also literature. And I'm fascinated about these two worlds. And in fact, Humans Academy is a combination of these two fields together with philosophy. I cannot stop seeing parallelisms and metaphors I can intertwine between these fields. So, for example, one is that books and every written piece of art is attached to its time and place. And to understand its major teachings, we need to analyze its period, but also its author's life. And in order to understand those teachings, we need to also dig deep into its conflicts. In the same way, life has conflicts, right? Internal and external. And to understand who we really are, we need to go deep into our own conflicts. Yet, it seems that we are creating a friction-free world. And all the tools that we are inventing, especially those technology-wise, seem to allow us to avoid every resistance on the journey. This might look like normal, but it's not. And I love Dr. Gabor Mate's perspective on this. He says that even if it looks like the norm, it doesn't make it normal. Under this same premise, he wrote his amazing masterpiece in collaboration with his song, The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. I highly, highly recommend you to look at this book. He says that a life without conflict doesn't exist. And if by any chance you want to avoid conflict because maybe you want to have more peaceful mindset or something, in fact, you're not avoiding conflict. What you are avoiding is a difficult conversation. And the problem is that the conflict is already there. It's in the room. Everyone can feel it. And we all know that conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. Under this same premise, the sooner you go to that difficult conversation, the healthier your life is going to be. This is one of the main reasons why people are so stressed and disconnected these days. The context we live in invites us to not confront our everyday conflicts. And together with this syndrome of busyness and stress, people running from one thing to the next, we are in fact increasing our own anxiety and loneliness. By the way, if you are interested in this topic, human disconnection and how to become more interdependent, I'm going to link the last episode here. Okay, so how do we stop this rising of human disconnection? From my perspective, is about the way in which we approach conflict. And in my mind, there are two pathways that we can deal with conflict in a new, more refreshed way through storytelling. This is going to be the juice of this episode. So I would suggest you go and grab a piece of paper and a pen or a notebook, something, and you take notes. The second point is going to be really surprising. The first way in which I would approach conflict from a standpoint of storytelling is by detaching completely the popular negative connotation of the word or even the concept of conflict, especially in this day and age of psychological awareness, which in my opinion has done more disservice to how we cope with conflict today. Don't get me wrong, therapy and coaching and any service for improving ourselves have done more good than bad. But after being in both sides, the helper and the helped one, I can say that the majority of us go look for therapy from a mindset of looking for validation and also expecting our therapist to hand on us a playbook on how to survive around idiots rather than, okay, where am I refusing to see that I am part of the problem? I am part of society. You know, like when we say society, like this is us as well. We are included in that demographics. This is the eternal concept of us versus them that is becoming increasingly more like me versus them, that also Brené Brown explains extensively in her masterpiece, Braving the Wilderness. And I would suggest you also go and check that book if you want to increase your awareness on belonging and you're fighting or you're struggling with how to belong and where to belong. That scares the hell out of me because this is the beginning of the dehumanization. We forget that it's precisely through difficult conversations that we connect truly. And I think there is a higher layer, like a more important layer than problem resolution. And that is leaving a conversation feeling that they have our back, that they are willing to put in the effort to understand us, and that they have our interest at heart. In other words, that we matter to them, that we are part of the same team. It's not me versus you, it's more we versus the problem. What do you think? What is your experience? Let me know in the comments. Are you going for therapy? Are you looking for other communities that are giving you the support that you need right now for your mental health, for your physical health, or even for your overall well-being? If that, let us also know what is your mindset when you go into these communities or into these services. The second one would be to embrace conflict from storytelling, which would be more like leaning into it, not only detaching the negative connotation, but also going for it, going into conflict, being excited by conflict. And since we have been talking about conflict resolution and having difficult conversations, you might be thinking, okay, this is the moment when Eva is going to give me a list of strategies, tricks, and tips to manage or to cope with difficult conversations. But the reality is like, no. My goal today, and this is what I told you from the very beginning, is to give you a different perspective on conflict through storytelling. And I've been obsessing about how can I contribute and give you value. And the other day, while I was journaling, it came to me, like it suddenly came to me. And so I want to share with you a piece of my journaling on this topic. People are stories, and stories are made of conflicts. When you see stories through the lens of storytelling, it's engaging, it's exciting, it's adventurous. No single story had a passive protagonist. There is no such thing as a plain story. At some point, she, the protagonist, changes her mindset from why me to what now. In other words, she'll be forced externally or internally to abandon security and convenience into the realm of fear and resistance. And whether she gains or loses whatever she was fighting for, one thing is for sure. She will never be the same person after that journey. she becomes a new version. And that is the meaning of life. Not what you obtain, not the destination, not even the journey, but the discovery. Life is about peeling layers to discover who we are. And that's the biggest conflict of all. Embracing that we will forever be facing challenges, always incomplete, always imperfect. And it takes responsibility to learn lessons from each of those conflicts, because that's the difference between not being dead and being alive. So this is my pathway number 2 on how to cope with conflict through the lens of storytelling, and that is embracing conflict. I think 2 main things happen when we look at conflict through this lens, that is therapeutic. And these are 2 truths that normally are hidden in our daily life. The first one is that sometimes conflict is not only inevitable, but also unsolvable. Meaning, most of the frustration that we have in difficult conversations are also coming from our expectation that the other person is going to give us what we need, or that the circumstances will change and will make us succeed. And I love how beautifully Esther Perel encompasses this idea when she says that most of the challenges of life are not problems to solve, but paradoxes to hold within. And we see this mostly when we polarize. We are oblivious that when we see the other person as the extreme, then we don't have to cope with the feeling of inner conflict. They represent for us the other extreme, but if that person wouldn't exist, now we have a cognitive dissonance, and now we have to cope with the inner conflict. And in many of the novels, the protagonist many times finishes the story without solving that conundrum, having to cope with the resolution herself or himself. It's not that clear that they have solved the problem. And I think that is a more realistic perspective on how to quote unquote solve problems. The second and final unappreciated truth and therapeutic benefit that we can take out of embracing conflict through the lens of storytelling is that no matter if we don't win or fix a problem, the fact is that conflict is the engine for transformation, is really the path for improving ourselves. So after any conflict that we go through, we will come out changed, wiser, more whole, more resilient. In reality, more authentic. By the way, Ryan Holiday has written an entire book out of this Stoic concept called The Obstacle is the Way. And I would highly, highly recommend you also read this book. I want to leave you with a classic folk tale that for me represents the power of seeing conflict through the lens of storytelling, and especially when conflict is not only inevitable but also unsolvable. And I want to stress the unsolvable piece of the puzzle, and that is Beauty and the Beast. Many of you might know this version through the version of Disney, and many of you would say that it's about finding the beauty inside those who are not that pretty at first glance, and that we need to scratch the surface of those who come across a little bit more physically or even verbally more aggressive at the beginning. That is an inaccurate meaning of the story. And I would dare to say it's more incomplete than inaccurate. For some of us who have studied literature and history, we know that for centuries, women told this story to their daughters in order to prepare them for arranged marriages. and what was going to come with that, which basically was sexual marital obligation, the unknown, societal expectations. In fact, this is a traditional narrative arc that scholars called the husband as animal. You get the idea. So folklorists have like a coding catalog where they internationally classify every single tale and story. It's called the ATU system, the Arnie Thompson Author Index. And it's basically an international catalog of recurring stories patterns. Beauty and the Beast belongs to the ATU 425, The Search for the Lost Husband, and a tale type found in dozens of cultures. There are versions that appear in Scandinavia, Greece, West Africa, the Middle East, and even indigenous America. This was not an isolated story, and definitely was not a romantic fantasy story. It was more like a survival guide. And especially it was a tool to instruct young women about how hard life was about to become. It was a way of saying life will hand on you things that you didn't choose. This is what fate demands from you, and this is how you survive in real life. It was tough, but it was real. It was useful. And I think that is really the power of storytelling when in conflicts, is that it doesn't give us happy endings, really. This was a tool that we have been using for centuries to understand how to survive in real life. So that was really the goal of storytelling for centuries, is understanding that we cannot change society in the speed of a sec. The same way you cannot change how things work at your workplace or in your family or in your relationship. But something is for sure, is that we need to give people something to hold on to, something that makes them analyze and reflect on how can I solve this inner conundrum at the same time that I cannot change how things work. It's all about turning chaos into meaning. That is really the goal of storytelling. Conflict, again, is inevitable, but also worth exploring. It's opportunity in disguise. And that is the last message I want to leave you with. Next time that you feel friction or resistance or overwhelmed by conflict, please lean into it. That is a future version of yourself saying hello from another dimension. It's your inner hero or heroine screaming at you, maybe whispering to you and saying, this is the moment when we can change the script, flip the page, and get curious about how and where this new opportunity is taking us. Thank you very much for listening to this second episode, and I see you in the next one.